listening to the Thornapple Valley Church podcast. Thank you for joining us. Our hope is for you to be encouraged and to connect with God during this message. If you'd like to know more about Thornapple Valley Church, visit tvcweb.com.
We're in a series right now called Big Questions. And we're asking questions that I think at some point in our lives, all of us ask. Whether we ask it or out loud, or we ask it in the quietness of our hearts, hoping maybe nobody would know that we're asking certain questions. Questions like, does my life have purpose? Today we're going to ask, does God exist? Next week we're going to tackle, if God does exist, why is there pain and suffering in the world? Is Jesus really God? Does Christianity feel a little bit too narrow? Is the Bible reliable? I have to be transparent with you this morning. I've never questioned the existence of God. Now, I've questioned God plenty. But I've never questioned the existence of God because for me, it was ingrained in me from the very beginning. I realize that's not everybody's story, but I was born on a Sunday, and the next Sunday, I was in church. All right? And I think that had its pros and its cons. But I never questioned the existence of God because it was just kind of put in there over and over and over again. Many, many years ago, I was over on the east side of the state in ministry there, and I had someone that was part of our ministry came up to me and said, I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind talking with my brother. He is a devout atheist, and he's very, very smart. In fact, he's a debater. He will often go down to the U of M campus, University of Michigan campus, and he'll debate. He'll debate with professors of religion and students and all of that. And he was just brilliant in so much of what he had aspired to learn. She came to me one day and said, Dan, I have to tell you that my brother has been diagnosed with terminal cancer. And as that disease progressed and it was getting near the end, her brother reached out to him and said, I'd like to know if you would ask Dan if he would come. Now I'll tell you the rest of that story in a few minutes. We all think about God from time to time, even if we conclude that we don't believe. It's nearly impossible not to think about the reality, the existence of God and what He's doing from time to time. In fact, I found some letters, real letters written by children to God. This is some of what they wrote. Dear God, I read the Bible, but what does begat mean? Nobody will tell me. Or, dear God, I bet it's hard for you to love everybody in the world. There's only 4 people in my family, and I can't do it. Dear God, are you really invisible, or is this a trick? Dear God, did you really mean do unto others as they do unto you? Because if you did, I'm going to fix my brother. Dear God, it's okay that there's all these different religions, but don't even you get mixed up sometimes? Dear God, how did you do all those miracles in the old days, but you're not doing any anymore? Dear God, I wish there was no such thing as sin. I wish there was no such thing as war. I love what little Larry writes. Dear God, maybe Cain and Abel wouldn't have killed each other so much if they had their own rooms. It works with me and my brother. The problem is, for some of us, is God doesn't always write back. And eventually we wonder if He even exists. I mean, have you ever been there before? Have you ever had the God, where are you right now moments? Have you ever had the God, what's going on right now? God, why am I having to go through this? God, this is not the way this was supposed to go. This was not how the relationship was supposed to end. This is not how the story was supposed to play out. God, this is not the answer I wanted or the answer that I expected. Have you ever had those times with God? I have them more often than you might even know. But here's the good news. God's not intimidated by your questions. He's not intimidated by the questions you have to ask. And by the way, just really quick, neither is the church that you're sitting in. For those of you watching online or across our campuses, this is a safe place for you to ask questions. And here's the other thing I want to tell you. God can also handle your emotions. He can handle it when you shake your fists and go, why? What's going on? This is not what I had expected. We've all written letters to God, even if it wasn't a literal letter. We've all tossed up prayers in the middle of our struggles. And the first thing I want you to know when it comes to around this idea of the existence of God is God welcomes your big questions. He's thrilled when you ask. I love it when one of my boys comes up to me and says, Dad, can I ask you a question? I don't look at him and go, that was a stupid question. You should already know the answer to that. I'm just thrilled he came to me. Come on, son, let me walk you through that. Let me help you understand that. Here's the deal. God doesn't always write his name in the sky when he writes back, but I'm going to tell you, he gives us some really good indicators of his presence, that he's there, that he's present. And in fact, in the Old Testament of the Bible, there's a guy by the name of David. He was a king of Israel. And he was called a man after God's own heart. And by the way, his story brings me some comfort because he made some decisions that were far from God's ideal for him. And yet God said, there's a guy that's after my heart. And he writes this book, and basically in the middle of the Bible, called the book of Psalms. They're songs, if you will. And a lot of them are raw and they're real and they come from what's going on in his heart. But he writes one that I think gives us a glimpse into the existence of God. He says this, the heavens declare the glory of God. The expanse, that's the sky, it proclaims the work of his hands. Have you ever looked out at a sunset when the cold air and the warm air are meeting and the sky is a brilliant pink, all these shades of pink? Or have you ever gone out? One of the reasons, by the way, I love living here is we don't have the light pollution that we had in the city. So I've taken my kids outside in the driveway and said, look up. I love their faces when they see the stars. This is what David's writing about. The expanse proclaims the work of his. Day after day, they pour out speech. They speak to us. Night after night, they communicate knowledge. And yet, he says, there's no speech. There are no words. I've never looked up at a sunrise and had it go, good morning, Dan. Their voice is not heard, but their message has gone out to the whole earth and their words to the ends of the world. In the heavens, God has pitched a tent for the sun. One of the places that we see the existence of God is in creation. Now, for the next few minutes, I'm going to give you a little bit of a warning. I'm about to go full-on nerd. Stay with me, all right? Stay with me, because for a few minutes, I want to create a case, if you will, for the existence of God in some things that maybe you and I would not naturally find ourselves thinking about. And I'm going to get a little bit heady for a minute, but just stay with me, because I'm going to try to explain this as best as I can. The complexity of our planet, Earth, points to a deliberate designer, a creator, who not only created the universe as we know it, but actually sustains it today. For example, the size of the earth as you and I live in it is perfect. The earth's size allows it to correspond to gravity in such a way that we have this thing called an atmosphere, okay? And that atmosphere contains exactly the gases that you and I need to sustain plant, animal, and human life. If the earth were any different in size, that atmosphere could not exist. So for example, if the earth were smaller, an atmosphere would be impossible. That would be like the planet Mercury, okay? If the earth were larger, one of the gases that would exist in the atmosphere would be free hydrogen. You and I could not breathe that in and exist. That would be like the planet Jupiter. Try this on. The earth is located exactly the distance that it needs to be from the sun. Consider the temperature swings that we encounter right here in Michigan. I woke up this morning, I got in the car, and I watched the thermometer gauge go 14, 12, 10, 7, 6, 3. And yet, if we get into the summertime, you and I will have days in the summer where it goes 90, 95, 100. That's a huge swing. Do you know that if the earth were even a fraction farther from the sun than it is, you and I would freeze? If the earth were a fraction of a distance away from the sun than it is, closer to the sun, we would burn up. Farther away, we would freeze, right? But have you ever thought about this? The earth remains this perfect distance from the sun while it rotates around the sun at a speed of approximately 67,000 miles an hour. Did you know that the earth is rotating around the sun at that speed? Of course you didn't know. I mean, come on. Who gets up in the morning, right? Pulls out their Bible app, reads the devotional, gets to the end and says, God, thank you for this day. And by the way, just keep it at 67,000 miles an hour today, okay? Thanks. We don't do that. It just happens, but we don't think about it. It's also rotating on its axis, allowing the entire surface of the earth to be cooled and warmed every single day. And by the way, we're also exactly the distance from the moon that we need to be, and the moon controls the tides of the ocean and huge bodies of water, and we're surrounded by a few of those, aren't we? Did you know if the distance from the earth to the moon were to shift in any significant way, all these big bodies of water would start spilling onto land? Yet something holds it all in perfect harmony. I have a question for you. Who did that? Was it some cosmic accident? Could an accident produce that much intentionality and detail? How about this? The universe had a start. It had a start. It had a beginning. In fact, an agnostic, a guy far from God, said the seed of everything that's happened in the universe was started in an instant. Something put it into being. What happened? The universe hasn't always existed. It had a start. I have a question. Who did that? People say, well, it was a big bang. Like, seriously, if I took a huge box of Legos and every little piece in there was enough to create a beautiful structure, how many times would I have to shake up the box, throw it out, and hope that the structure would automatically exist? There's a designer who, with high levels of intentionality, spoke things into being. I have a question for you. Who did that? Who did that? How is it that we can identify laws of nature that never change, and the universe is so orderly and so reliable? Richard Feynman, a Nobel Prize winner for quantum electrodynamics. He says why nature is so mathematical is a mystery. This is what he says, the fact that there are even rules make it a miracle. Let me make it really simple for you. I wear this thing every day. It's a watch. And this is not just any watch. It kind of can do some cool stuff. Like, for example, if my phone rings and I'm not around to get it, this thing will vibrate on my wrist to tell me that my phone is ringing. Actually, at times it's a plague, not a blessing. Right? But this thing, I can set it to check my heart rate and my pulse. And it will alert me if something's off in my sinus rhythm. Right? Whoever uses that. But anyway, if I get a text, it'll tap me on the wrist. But you want to know the irony? If I were to walk outside right now and I were to pull a living leaf off of a tree, I could hand you this watch and all the things necessary to put it back together, and you could do it. But I could hand you a leaf and say, go create this from nothing, and you know what? You couldn't do it. Who did that? Let me take it a step further if your brain's not hurting already. You and I have a code in each of our cells that informs everything about us. It's like a computer code, if you will. In fact, when you and I turn on a computer or pull out our smartphone and we hit an app and it opens up, really what you're not seeing is code, a system of numbers that when they're put together in a certain way, they make our computer operate. They make our smartphones operate. Now, we don't see that code. It's kind of like the Matrix. Anybody see the Matrix with all the green numbers falling down? That's the code behind everything. And as you may know, a computer program is made up of ones and zeros like this. Okay? And the way they're arranged tell the computer program what to do. You and I have a DNA code in our cells. In fact, so let me back up. Each one of those is arranged by 4 chemicals that exist in your DNA. And scientists have abbreviated them as A, T, G, and C. Stay with me. And so if you were to look at the DNA in one cell, and we're made up of billions of them, they would look like a letter system like this. That's how scientists have captured it, and so on. Do you know there's 3 billion of these letters in every human cell? 3 billion. And just like you can program your phone to beep for specific reasons, DNA tells your cells what to do. DNA is a 3 billion lettered program telling your cells to act in a certain way. It's like an instruction manual. And the results are your eyes are going to be a certain color, your hair is going to be a certain color, you're going to be a certain height, you're going to have certain abilities maybe that other people may not have. All of this comes down to how your DNA has been programmed. You have to ask yourself, how did that information wind up in every human cell? These are not just chemicals. These are chemicals that instruct, that code in a very detailed way exactly how a person's body ought to develop. I have a question for you. Who did that? Who put that much detail in? See, that guy David who talked about the heavens, the expanse declaring God, he went on in Psalm 139 and he wrote this, "For it was you, God, who created my inmost parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I'll praise you because I've been remarkably and wondrously made. Your works are wondrous. And I know this very well. My bones were not hidden from you when I was made in secret, when I was formed in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw me when I was formless. All my days were written in your book before one of them began. God, how precious your thoughts are to me. How vast their sum is." He's saying, God, you did it all. I'm not some accident. You knit me together. You saw me before I even had form. You put time into this. I read a story about an atheist who had an encounter with God, and he writes, "I was an atheist at one time, and like many atheists, the issue of people believing in God bothered me. What is it about atheists that we would spend so much time, attention, and energy refuting something that we don't even believe exists anyway? What causes us to do that? When I was an atheist, I attributed my intentions as caring for those poor, delusional people to help them realize that their hope was completely ill-founded. To be honest, he writes, I had another motive. As I challenged those who believed in God, I was deeply curious to see if they could convince me otherwise. Part of my quest, he writes, was to become free from the question of God. And if I could conclusively prove to believers that they were wrong, then the issue would be off the table and I'd be able to go about my life. I didn't realize that the reason the topic of God weighed so heavily on my mind was because God was actually the one pressing the issue. See, I don't know if you realize this, but Solomon, one of the wisest men ever to walk the planet, he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. We talked about it 2 weeks ago. He actually put it like this: God has put eternity in the hearts of every man. In other words, you have a hole in your life. It is a God-shaped hole that only he can fill. And you will spend your life looking to fill that hole while God says, I'm right here and I'll fill in the space. Here's this atheist, and he's writing this. He says, it's as if I couldn't escape thinking about the possibility of God. In fact, the day I chose to acknowledge God's existence, my prayer started like this: okay, you win. And he writes, he says, I'm not the only one who experienced this. There was a guy by the name of C.S. Lewis, one of the most prolific authors of our time, and he remembers being an atheist, and he wrote, night after night, feeling whenever my mind would lift even for a second from my work, I had this unrelenting approach of him that I so desired not to meet. And I gave in, and I admitted that God was God, and I prayed that night, the most dejected and reluctant convert in all of England. He goes on and he writes a book called Surprised by Joy. Is the evidence convincing? I mean, we could look to morality, the innate ability to say certain things are right and certain things are wrong. Where did that come from? We could simply look at intelligence, our ability to process things. You're listening to me right now. But while you're listening to me, your brain is processing. Your emotions are engaging and interacting. Your eyes and your ears are all working together. Where did that come from? How about this? The ability to love. It's said that every human being has two basic needs: the need to love and the need to be loved. Everything comes down to that. I want to be able to love others and be loved. Where did that come from? Where did that come from? See, it's important that we get our hands and our heads around this, because I love this quote by A.W. Tozer, one of my favorite Christian authors. He says, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. It's really what defines us. What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. In fact, if you believe in the existence of God, do you live your life in such a way that he actually exists? Catch the difference. There's a lot of things that I believe exist, but there's only one that informs nearly everything about my life. It informs how I lead. It informs how I parent. It informs how I husband in my marriage. It informs how I deal with conflict, all of it. And that's God and his living presence in my life. See, I believe that every person here were to truly live not only as if God exists, but like he cares for us and has a plan for us, what would change in our lives? Can I just say something? I didn't say this in the other services. 95% of people that I've met who say they don't believe in God, actually, it isn't that they don't believe in God. If you were to press in hard enough, they would take you to a moment where God did not come through in the way that they thought he ought to. And that was the moment they stopped. What would change if not only do we live like God existed, but like he cares for us and has a plan for us? What would change in our lives, in our families, in our schools, in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods, in our marriages, in our friendships? Imagine if we lived as if God were with us always. That would be enough to change the world. In fact, they had Jesus as a captive audience one day and said, there's all these laws in the Old Testament. Which ones are the most important? Is it this one or is it that one? And Jesus says, here are the most important thing that I want you to know. This is the greatest commandment. Ready? Love God, love each other, and love yourself. You tell me one thing that's plaguing the world right now that could not be remedied with one of these three things, or all three of them working together. Worry, anxiety, fear, relational challenges, self-image, self-esteem. Go through it. Love God, love others. Tell me one facet of the world that would not be markedly better if all of humanity did not embrace these three things. See, to believe God exists is to live like he does, and that'll change the world. But often I meet people who say, well, I just need to have more of God in my life. I need to have more of God in my life. And I want you just to imagine, use your imagination with me for a moment. Let's imagine I had a table here, and on that table was a large pickle jar, like a glass pickle jar. You know what I'm talking about, right? The gallon kind. And let's imagine I had that thing filled to the very top. And on this side, I had maybe some kind of a jar full of water, small. Now, if I were to ask you, how do I take this small jar and put it in that jar, because that jar is already full? If I said, no matter what, before we leave today, I need to get this water in that jar, the answer would be very simple. You would tell me to empty out some of what's in the big jar to make room. I want to say to you today that the God who created the heavens and the earth is revealing himself to you every single day. And if you find yourself saying, I just want more of God, I'm going to tell you the secret. He's given all of himself. But if you want more of him, there needs to be less of you. And so we actually do this really cool thing for the 40 days leading up to Easter. We call it fast forward. And it's really simple. What can I say no to so that I can say yes to something better? What are the time wasters in your life? What are the things that constantly get you down? What are the things that take you maybe to a place you know you shouldn't go mentally or emotionally? Like in our house right now, we've just decided for 40 days we're going to give up social media. Yes. I know I'll save time and I'll save emotional energy and maybe even a little heartache, because can I just be honest with you? Sometimes scrolling through, it doesn't bring me to a good place. Maybe for you, it might be a food thing that you gave up. Or maybe it's a toxic relationship where you say, you know what? I'm going to put that friendship on the back burner right now and ask God to give me more of himself. So in the bundle on your seat, there is a card that says fast forward on it. I want you to pray about this. I want you to think about this. What is it in your life that you need to say no to so that you can say yes to something better? Then as you leave today and you go out into the lobby, there's some tables there and there's some bracelets there that look like this. And this is just, there's a few kinds actually, but it just says fast forward on it. It's black and it's white. And the black is just symbolic to remind you of what you're saying no to. And the white is to remind you of what you're saying yes to. TVC Kids and Fusion, they're going to be doing this as well. And if you're watching online and you want to be a part, your hosts are going to tell you right now how you can get one of these, and we'll send them to you. But I believe this next season in your life is a season where God would not only not want to prove his existence in your life, but he wants to show you what he's been up to in your life. And I want to encourage you to think about, fast forward. Now, remember back in the beginning I told you about the atheist? Here I was at the University of Michigan Hospital. His sister had brought me in. I got to his room and he was laying in the bed, frail, a skeleton of his former self. His sister said, it's really just a matter of time. We're just waiting. There's something interesting that happens if you've ever been with somebody as they are preparing to go home and be with the Lord. It's a really, really weird thing, and I've seen it lots and lots of times. Right up at the very, very end, sometimes they become very lucid. They become very awake, very aware. It's like a moment of clarity where it's like, whoa. And you almost think, like it's like a 180. And then very shortly thereafter, God calls that person. Well, I happened to get to be there for that moment in this guy's life. His eyes opened and he turned to his sister and he said, I just need you to leave the room for a moment. I want to be alone with Dan. I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, Dan, I'm terrified. It's the end. Is there any way that the God who you say created all things could possibly love me, a guy who committed the majority of his adult life to erasing God from people's minds? I held his hand and I said, buddy, the one who created you never turned his face from you. And all the time that you were running, he had no problem keeping up with you. And he's here right now with his arms open wide, ready to receive you and to take you to be with him. I will never forget the moment. He looked up in the corner of that room and he said, I see him. And I said, Rob, are you ready? And with the last vestiges of breath that he had, he cried out and he said, yes, yes, God, I receive you. I felt his hand loosen, his head go back as he took his last breath. And I believe that day I got to be in the room while God himself came down to this fighter and said, you could run, but you couldn't hide. And in the end, I'm here to take you. Do you want to know the most powerful proof of God's existence? Let me ask you a question. How many of you sitting here today or watching online could say that your life is markedly different since you encountered God? If it is, put your hand up. If you're watching online, you can use that little hand emoji. Look around you, because here's what it all comes down to. The greatest proof of the existence of God is not going to be facts and figures, scientific evidence, and all of that. The greatest proof of the existence of God in you and in me is this: your changed life. And the God who created the heavens and the earth, his primary business is changing lives. And I told you in the beginning, I said to you, if God did not exist, there's a very, very good chance that I wouldn't either, because at 15 years old, he showed up in a bathroom where I was ready to take my life. And as loud as I've ever heard him, he screamed in my ear and said, I created you for a purpose, and I'm not finished with you yet. And I'm here to tell you today, God's not done with you yet. Father, thank you for your love for us, for your mercies that are new every morning, and for your faithfulness. Meet us here, God, in these moments and in these days ahead. In the matchless name of Jesus, our Savior, I pray. Amen.
Thank you for listening to the Thornapple Valley Church podcast. If you found this message encouraging, we invite you to share it. For more information, visit tvcweb.com.